Welcome to Therapy Unplugged, the podcast where two therapists offer insights to the real-life issues we all experience. We are your hosts, Sarah Benoit and Meaghan McCullough.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Season 2 of Therapy Unplugged. It's Meaghan here, and I'm with Sarah. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm doing well. Hello, listeners, and welcome back.
Sarah and I were just talking a moment ago about how crazy it feels to us that we're starting Season 2, and we did take. I'm not exactly sure how much time we took off, but was it close to 2 months or a month and a half?
I think it was about 6 weeks.
Okay, yeah, about 6 weeks, and here we are. It's the beginning of September, and I am looking forward to getting back into it.
Me too. I think we haven't talked about this in a while, but I know that when we had taken the break, one of the things I had was all these plans that I was going to perfect things for season 2, and I didn't.
Maybe nor I, and maybe the break was literally just about practicing what we preach and taking a break,
Yes.
right? I
Yeah.
know you did some fun things this summer, and
Mhm.
I did a few fun things. It was kind of a different summer for me in a lot of ways, but yeah, maybe that's just what needed to happen. And I think
Mhm.
by now, any of our listeners that have been with us through season 1 know that we're really not about this isn't about the perfect podcast.
Right.
Yeah, I think this is about a conversation between two friends, two therapists about these mental health subjects that we find that come up over and over again in our private practices.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think that not just in our private practice, but in our daily lives,
Yes.
we're all struggling or experiencing things that we've talked about. And to your point, that whole idea of I know we ended season 1 on the idea of self-care.
Mhm.
And as much as, there's that part of me that's driven and I said, "Oh, I had all these things I wanted to accomplish
Mhm.
relative to the podcast." It was great to just do some fun things and to really try to be present in my own life and not worry about, "Oh, I've gotta," I think we've talked before about, "I've gotta be productive," or, "I've got to accomplish this." And it was nice. It was fun.
Absolutely. Yes. And so for today, for our first episode back in our second season, we are going to have a conversation about boundaries and
Mhm.
healthy boundaries and at times lack of boundaries and what that looks like. And Sarah, when I do take time to reflect back on season 1, I think that so much of what we covered, right, whether we were discussing how to cultivate authenticity, how to diminish the need to be perfect,
Mm.
how to kind of move away from toxic productivity, like all of these topics really can be tied to either having healthy boundaries or maybe we're stuck in a pattern of a lack of healthy boundaries.
Yes.
So we thought that this would be a good topic to kind of start with for season 2. And as always, so we'll discuss what healthy and unhealthy boundaries are, but we will give you strategies to create and maintain boundaries in your own life. And maybe we'll talk about a few boundaries that people haven't necessarily thought of before.
Mhm.
So I feel good about this. Do you have anything to add about that, just in terms of the overview?
The only thing I think I would throw out there, and just to kind of also tie this back to season 1 and our ending on self-care, is that boundaries really are a critical component of self-care. And just to really support your point, I think if we, whether if there's a lack of boundary or if there are healthy boundaries, it's really kind of it can really, I hate to say it this way, but dictate, um, so much of what we've talked about in the past,
Yes.
and I think the other part of it too, and I know you're really good at this, where you like to take that broad brush kind of 30,000-foot view,
Mhm.
and I think that people, at least this has been my experience, is that people think of boundaries almost like on a micro level. And I know that that's part of what we're going to talk about today, but I think it's important for people to understand it from that broader perspective where this boundaries are really what shapes our culture and, our social context and our personalities. And I think without them, can you imagine like our society without boundaries?
Mhm.
Imagine living in a community without boundaries. And the thing is a lot of these might be implied, but we know them. And I think part of what we're gonna be doing today is really asking people to look more closely at what that means and maybe reflect on, you know, hopefully people might start thinking about like, okay, well what is my world and what are the boundaries in my world? What works, what doesn't? What do I want to change?
Mhm. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, I like to think of them as, almost like they're the building blocks or the blueprint
Mm,
for just living a healthy life. And that would mean, both emotion that it would mean emotional health, it would mean physical health, right? Mental health,
yep.
obviously. Um, and yeah, I agree. I agree with everything that you're saying. And one more thing I will add too is that when we're talking about boundaries, whether we're talking about boundaries with others, whether we're talking about boundaries, for example, at the workplace. I know
Mhm.
we talked about that in the last season. We're also going to talk a lot today about boundaries with ourselves.
Yes.
Because I don't know about you, but one thing that I find, in in my private practice is that in this day and age, a fair amount of my clients are very good at recognizing, like, what it takes to have a healthy relationship and what it takes to establish and maintain healthy boundaries with other people.
Mhm.
But and so that's wonderful, but I think that sometimes what I don't hear as much about is that they've also figured out what their own boundaries mean, like, within themselves. So,
Yes.
I'm hoping we can really kind of delve into that a little deeper too.
I agree. It's interesting that you're bringing that up because I had a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking in general about how, of course, we grew up, we didn't have social media, and it's that idea of how public do you want your life to be on
Mhm.
social media, and what are those boundaries within yourself? And it was very interesting because she made a really good point, which is, you know, sometimes people will throw things out there. It's like, "Oh, I have this idea or this thought, or I want everyone to see this," but they don't think of the consequences
Yes.
once that's out there. And I think for me, that's a good example of a boundary because how much of ourselves do we want to share? I don't mean that just on social media, but in general, because that could have a lot of consequences, some positive, some negative.
100%. And that is, I'm looking in my notes right now, and just this morning, I added this idea of I'm calling them, we don't have to call it this, you can call it whatever you want, but like energetic boundaries, right?
Yes.
Meaning, how much energy do I truly want to give to this project or to this person?
Mhm.
Um, and and I think that, yeah, there's so many of us that maybe tend to put that last, right? Like, when we're talking about boundaries, maybe our own boundaries get put, shoved down there a little bit. So,
Right, right. And that's a big one that I have. That's a big conversation I have with people in my practice because on that energetic level, whether it's that spoon theory of, okay, I've got 10 spoons today, how much, you know, extra, or do I want to push it so that I'm depleted? Or just from an emotional standpoint, like, even I know when I'm scheduling clients, like, if
mm,
there's some really intense people, I try not to book them back to back
yes.
because I'm trying to look out for myself and say, "Okay, what can I handle? Are they gonna get the best of me, or is someone gonna get shortchanged because I'm exhausted?"
Yes. Really good example. And one more along those same lines I'll give is that I know when I first became a therapist, I was actually seeing more clients in a day than I do now,
Mhm.
even though now I have much more experience. But because of my experience, it's like now I know what my personal limits are, right? So
Yes.
I don't want to pack so many clients into a day that right, there maybe by the end of the day, they may be getting a little shortchanged, not that I'm doing it purposefully, right? But so now I've learned kinda where that sweet spot is for me in terms of being present and giving the client my all, um, and yeah, it's a personal limit
Mhm.
that I have both for myself, but also as an extension to my client and wanting to give them the best mental health care that I can.
Mhm.
So do you think do you think we've covered what we feel healthy boundaries are, or are not? Or is there anything else you want to say about that before we kind of get more into maybe the different areas of our lives where we want to be cultivating boundaries?
I think there are 2 things that I'd want to throw out there, and I think
Mhm,
if someone is going to have healthy boundaries, it requires work.
mhm.
And I say that because I think it means that there's a certain level of self-awareness that has to be
Yes.
present.
Yes.
I think it's also a certain level of self-respect
Yes.
and the respect of others. And the first word that popped into my mind was respecting someone's time.
Mhm,
And I think the other piece that goes along with that is that ability to communicate clearly, to say, and that I think is can be really challenging for people. Um, I think on one level it can be a skill, but on another level, it's just what gets in the way of that. It can be anxiety that gets in the way of that. It can be a lack of self-esteem, or I don't want to hurt this person's feelings, kind of that people
mhm,
pleasing thing. And I think if we have those things, the other benefit that this yields is that if we're able to then have healthy boundaries, it really allows us to be separate from other people. And I don't mean that in a negative way.
mhm,
But it allows us to truly be an individual and to respect ourselves, but respecting other people. And it just allows for healthier relationships, maneuvering in more healthy ways with other people so that you're not maybe getting sucked into codependence or, enmeshment or things like that. And that's a huge generalization, and it's not that simple,
mhm.
but I do think that's a factor.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I was trying not to laugh when you just mentioned those extra things, like you said, the personal awareness and the self-respect, because just this morning, as I was kind of getting into the healthy mental space to do the podcast, I was talking to Derek, my partner, just a little bit about the topic. And we were just discussing boundaries in general. And that he said, I think that there needs to be a real level of your own personal awareness if
Mhm.
you are to have healthy boundaries within yourself. And I said, "Yep," and self-respect. Well, actually, I think I said self-love, but,
Mhm,
um right, like, because you may know what your personal limits are, but if you're in a destructive pattern, or if you're right, like you had mentioned the low self if you're having low self-esteem or feelings of, unworthiness or not being enough, those are topics we definitely have already talked about before. But, if I'm not feeling good enough, if I'm feeling unworthy, I don't know if my motivation's gonna be too high to honor my own personal limit.
yes,
So, I think those go hand in hand, and so if there are listeners out there that are struggling with setting some personal boundaries or setting these personal limits, you may wanna also take just a real closer look at your own relationship with yourself,
mhm,
and are there places where you really need to practice the self-compassion? Or do you need to go to maybe you need to talk it out with a therapist. Maybe you need to, um, do the process of self-inquiry that we've talked about in the past where you journal,
mhm,
but all of those things I think can really be tied back into this discussion.
absolutely.
So if we kind of move then if we transition into talking more about these different areas of our lives that we want to cultivate boundaries and then start to give some examples and strategies of how to do that. Is there any that where do you want to start?
Oh, throw a dart. I don't know that there's a bit good or bad place to start.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, are you also talking about, like, the different types of boundaries? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. Um, well, to throw a dart, I mean, I think one of the big ones that I see is, I think I mentioned it earlier, is time.
Mhm.
And I mean, there's no order to any of these,
Right, right.
but I know that and I will fall into this. I've gotten a lot better, but I will be so excited about something or I really wanna help someone, and it's, like, on the tip of my tongue. I used to do this. I used to overcommit, and I'd be like, "Yeah, no problem." And then
Mhm.
I'd look and go, "Oh my god, how am I gonna do all this?" And so I've really had to practice, like, not offering because I do also value, like, if I say I'm gonna do something, I do it.
Yeah.
And so that's been really interesting, and I think the other things that kind of fall into time is and I don't know if you do this, but I know that say if I have 10 minutes maybe in between clients and I need to talk to someone, I make sure I tell them, like, "This is what I have for"
Yeah.
I've got 8 minutes, and I do that for them and for me so that
Mhm.
I'm not then running late or,
Right.
if there's things that we have to prioritize, we can certainly do that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a great one to start with because, and I know we this has been brought up in season 1, but I think that, issues with time management come up a lot for me with my
Mm,
clients, like, let's say in the first couple of sessions, we're kind of figuring out what the agenda is and what goals they have and what areas of their life they wanna improve. It's it's amazing to me, um, how many people really do struggle with time management. So right, establishing kind of those boundaries with time, and again, it goes back to really getting to intimately know yourself,
yes.
um, as well as, of course, the more practical application of, "Okay, I have 10 minutes," right? And being aware of that 10 minutes. I know, and I also just wanna say too that, I certainly have my issues and things to work on. Time management isn't really one of them,
Mhm.
and I think that I don't know if you agree or disagree with this, but I feel like some people are just kind of they have that built-in skill of just being aware of how much maybe time something like a task might take. Um, and some people don't. And
Yes.
it's nothing to be ashamed of, right? Like it's so funny because in my family, this is my immediate family. I'm kind of calling out family members now, but I'm doing it in a loving way. I have a brother and a sister, and then my mom and my dad. And out of the 5 of us, my mom and I are really the only ones that had a very good sense of time. And
Hmm.
my sister and my brother and my dad just didn't really I don't wanna say they don't care about it, but it just they approached it very differently.
Hmm.
And I know when I was younger, I used to feel irritated by that, but as I've gotten older, I really have come to understand that we just have differences, and so
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. But it is important, right? Like, I if you're working at a job and you have a project you're doing and it needs to be done by Friday and it's Thursday afternoon and you're nowhere near done, right? That it is a pro
Yes.
that's gonna be a problem. So, it's
Yes.
it's a good one to work on.
Yeah. What are some of the boundaries, like the types that really, like, you either deal with a lot with clients or really pop out to you that are, like, you feel are
Mhm.
really important?
Yeah, well, like I already said, the time management definitely comes up a lot. Um, I think that the one I'd kinda like to loop back to, if you're okay with it right now, um, is the more maybe the I'm struggling to kinda think of how to phrase it, but the self-care boundaries,
Mhm.
the 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 boundaries that are really more, I'm gonna say subtle, like, they're more the kind of things that you just learn about yourself
Mhm.
that that either you kinda set the boundary and you feel better, you feel good, you feel like you're more balanced, or you don't set the boundary and you start to feel out of balance. Um, I do see this a lot,
Mhm.
and, so I have some clients that have really figured out, um, some of these other boundaries, right? Like, I'm just throwing some examples, like boundaries around personal space or
Mhm.
boundaries around physical touch or just boundaries in general about what makes a healthy relationship with their partner versus an unhealthy relationship. I find, and I'm curious if you see this or not, but this is just my viewpoint is that a lot of my clients have that figured out, or they're working on it, or they're aware, they're aware of it,
Mhm.
um, but less so when it comes to treating themselves, like really understanding their own personal limits, like within themselves. So an example might be, uh, you know, I know that I am at my best if I get 8 hours of sleep.
Mhm.
Right? Let's just say it's that. So let's imagine that I know 8 hours is what I need, yet I push myself 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning before I go to bed, and I'm only getting half that,
Mhm.
right? Like, so I'm only getting 4 hours of sleep versus 8. I look at that as, like, you know, it's a boundary issue. You're not respecting the the more healthy boundary you could give yourself, which would be, "I'm gonna get the 8 hours of sleep."
Mhm. Mhm. Um, I do see that, and I don't know. Here's what's kind of coming up for me is
Mhm.
that when I see people not respecting their own boundaries, oftentimes it's because they are putting other people first.
Yes.
And there's I guess some of the feelings that come up are, there's feelings of guilt. Or there's, like I don't deserve to get that 8 hours of sleep. I need, I'm a mom, or I need to
Mhm,
work, or I need to do this, I
mhm.
need to do that. Um, and obviously not looking at the bigger picture, knowing that, okay, if I get my 8 hours, like I'm going to be on my game versus if I get four
Right.
hours, I'm going to be a hot mess. Um, so I do see it, and I'm trying to think of other ways that I see it with people, and nothing's really, unfortunately, popping into my head
Mhm.
right now.
Well, and, maybe what I'm thinking about too could be a whole nother episode in and of itself, more about healthy routines. Because for me, I'm
Mm.
big on that.
Yep.
But that like, another one I'm thinking of is, you know, um, like nutrition,
Mhm.
right? You know, and I'm sure we all have done this time to time, but I think that in general, we probably know as an adult that, you're probably gonna feel better eating whatever, right? Let's say the balanced meal, the veggies and the protein, you know, than eating the junk food, right?
Right.
But but so many of us tend to, at times, right,
Mhm.
go for the junk food. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really helpful and I think this is it it's a helpful point, and I do think maybe we should consider doing this as its own episode, because that is one thing that I really have clients that struggle with, the idea of routine and how that's tied to that idea of boundaries, self-respect,
Yep.
self-love, compassion, and I think it's very real, because if you think of what happens, right? Like, I think we all have these great intentions like, "Okay, I'm gonna eat healthy, I'm gonna go to the gym, I'm gonna get good
Mhm.
sleep, I'm gonna drink however many ounces of water." And then life happens,
Right.
and you've got your stressors, and you've got, "Oh, this threw me off, and that threw me off," and then all of a sudden you're off your game. Um, and I think part of part of what's coming up for me around that idea of, because it does tie to boundaries, that whole idea of routine, those are your boundaries. Like, I am
Right.
notorious. So we went to play mini golf, putt-putt on Friday, and so I was off my routine. I
Mhm.
mean, we got home, and by the time I got home, I normally would have been in bed reading or
Mhm.
something.
Mhm.
I couldn't sleep. I got the worst night's sleep because I was off my routine.
Yeah.
And I had to make a choice, though. I mean, if I don't wanna follow my routine so rigidly that I can't go have fun,
Right.
but I also have to know that, okay, this is what's gonna happen. There's a really good chance that something's gonna get thrown off for me because I just have a sensitive system.
Yes, exactly. And that's such a good point, Sarah, and that gets back to the self-awareness piece, right? It's
Mhm.
we're not suggesting that every minute of the day you should be, to live a healthy life, you have to just constantly be setting these boundaries and establishing these routines because it's life, right? Like, life happens. And you mentioned the mini golf, and one that I can mention too because it literally just occurred is just this past week I got back from I traveled to Minnesota with my sister and my mother to see extended family that we haven't seen in a very long time. And it was really important to me for my mom to get to have another trip to Minnesota.
Mm.
Um, so that was my priority. However, I knew that, we wanted to book nonstop flights for her,
Mhm.
because she's elderly and it would have been pretty tricky to switch planes. So we were able to get nonstop flights. However, the nonstop flights were at pretty unreasonable hours of the day. So this past Wednesday, I literally was up all night long. I climbed into bed. By the time we finally got home from the airport, it was 4 in the morning
Oof.
on Wednesday. And now you're talking to a girl who typically, same as you, like I'm usually these days, like 9 o'clock, I'm in bed. Like
Mhm.
I'm in bed. And so I knew that though, right? Like I knew the whole trip that we were gonna get back that late. And I just kind of, and I'm very aware of what my limits are. But in this case, I was willing to kind of put my own limits aside for the sake of getting to go on this trip and really especially to give it to my mother. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. One thing, and I don't know if this feels like a good segue to you, but one thing that just kind of piggybacking on that idea of routine. So when I don't get sleep, or enough sleep, I will generally, I mean, not only do I feel miserable the next day, it's like feeling hungover, but if I've genuinely gotten like extremely little sleep, my anxiety will then amp up. And it's I know that about myself, and that's one of the things
Mhm.
I always, kind of preach to my clients is that there's certain things that biologically are going to trigger your anxiety, and for me personally, one of those is a lack of sleep. And I think one of the things I find with people is that one of the biggest boundaries that they ignore is their emotional boundaries.
Yes.
So if someone, as an example, they interact with someone that makes them very anxious or scared, they don't say no. They just keep doing it, and then they're really struggling, and they're trying to dig themselves out of that hole and calm their whole system down. And I don't know if that's something that you see a lot of as well as that emotional boundaries difficulty.
Absolutely. That is in my notes. And you know, I I like to think of establishing emotional boundaries as really establishing your own comfort level in being able to identify your feelings and your needs and
Mhm.
express your feelings and your needs with others. It's it can be a real challenge for people to fully do that.
Yes.
And I think that that's one of the reasons why I think relationships do can start to break down
Mhm.
is just it's that lack of true authentic communication, right? Where I can tell you what I need and you can tell me what you need and we come to some sort of, understanding and we commit to, as best as we're able to, right? To make sure that needs are being met.
Yes. Yeah.
Another I have this I was just looking at
Mhm.
my notes on emotional boundaries. I also put, under this topic, although I think you could also put this under the kinda energetic, um, boundaries that I was talking about before, but, um, learning to not take on other people's stuff as your own,
Yes. Yes.
and in turn, not putting your own stuff and projecting it onto other people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is a big one because and again, it goes back to that self-awareness. I don't think people realize sometimes that what they're putting onto other people. And then conversely, I think you've got people who worry so much about it that they then don't share because "Oh, I don't wanna burden you," or "I don't wanna put that on you." And I agree that there's a time and a place, and I kind of internally chuckle when I'm in session with someone and they're like, "Oh, I don't wanna put that on you." I'm like, "Well, that's why you're here."
Yes, right, right, right. Yep. Yeah, I get that too.
Yeah. I think another one, and this isn't one that's talked about, I don't think it's talked about very often, but it's kind of financial boundaries.
Mm,
Um, I've had this come up, I mean, not recently, but in the past with clients where they will struggle with the idea of saying no to lending someone money, or to paying for
Yeah.
certain things like, "Oh, I've always done that, but I really can't afford to do it anymore, but I'm still doing it." I'm like, "Well, why are you still doing it?" If
Mhm.
especially if you can't afford to, like, if you're digging yourself a hole.
Yes.
And it's really interesting because it's not just I mean, it's never just about the money, but it's all those feelings that go with that, whether that's feeling obligated or wanting to make things easier for that person or feeling like they can't say no, not having, the confidence to, well, what happens if this person gets mad at me if I don't give them $1,000 or, whatever. Um, and what I have found is that no one is ever really direct when it comes to even having the conversation about
Mm-mm.
financial or monetary boundaries. And I think it comes up in really awkward moments. Like
Mhm.
I know that like one of the big trends that's been for a few years is like the bachelorette, like you travel somewhere for like, 3 to 5 days, and not everyone can afford that.
Right. Yes.
And I
Yes.
have seen that be really challenging for people to either they go and they're like, "Man, now I'm so broke and I can't now I'm struggling to pay this and that." And then I see others where they do say no, but the guilt and how do I communicate to this person, like, "I would love to be there for you, but that is not in my budget." And it's really it can be very tricky.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a good one. In fact, it's making me think about, I once had a client that was, in a wedding party, and she was a teacher,
Mhm,
and the wedding happened to be, like, the 2nd week that school had started, and it was a 4-hour drive. It was they were supposed to be there the whole weekend, and she really struggled with that, but she did a really good job of, we kinda worked through in session, she had made the commitment, she was definitely going to be in the wedding,
mhm,
but we had talked about how could she communicate clearly to the bride that this is what I'll be able to do and this is what I won't be able to do. Like, I
mhm,
think one of the compromises was, she originally they were expected to be there, like, on a Friday night, and they had worked all day, so they said, "No, we can't do that, but we'll be there Saturday morning," that
mhm.
kind of thing.
Yep.
So, she did a really good job, I think, of kind of establishing those boundaries, but it's not easy
No,
for a
it's
lot of
not.
people.
Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah.
One that we haven't brought up yet, and I think it's actually one of the more common things that people might think of
Mhm,
when they think of establishing boundaries, but just this idea of personal space boundaries, and you could probably put also in that bracket, although I think I made it 2 separate topics, but physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, personal
yes,
space boundaries, right?
yes.
Um, and so we haven't really talked about that one yet. But I was reflecting, it was kind of interesting. We're close to the same age. So I was curious if you have kind of experienced this too. But I was thinking back to like when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, I feel like there was not as many boundaries around certain things,
Mhm,
like even just the way, like, men might address women,
mhm,
right? Like, I just think that back then, it was pretty typical, just, "Oh, sweetie, sweetheart," whatever, and I'm not going to go on a soapbox about whether I think that's right or wrong. It is what it is, right? It was
mhm.
what it was.
Yep.
But times have really changed.
Yes.
Right? And so I think that now, like, in today's age and kids growing up in school and things like that, there's so much more awareness, I think,
Yeah.
of that type of thing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because and I think for me, where I became the most aware of boundaries was during the pandemic,
Mm,
and we were forced to, really. Um, and it stayed with me, like, there are things now, like, I never would have thought, of, like, kind of being sardined into a grocery line, at
mhm,
the checkout, and we couldn't do that anymore, during the pandemic, and I think that has, in a lot of ways, at least for me, it's carried over because I'm very conscious of, "Okay, you're kinda close to me, dude, like, back it up." Um, and I wouldn't be before, or
yeah,
I didn't even think of it before,
mhm,
and I think to your point also, I think the younger generations, I think they talk more about it,
absolutely.
and I think they support it more with each other. I mean, because I can tell you in high school, in college, like, those weren't conversations we were having.
Exactly. No, not
Never
at all.
talked about that.
Mm-mm, mm-mm,
And so but I also think it's interesting because for some people, I think they can talk about, like, that's a really important boundary to have as a physical boundary, but when it comes down to it, it can be really challenging, and I think part of that is, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, whether it's the family situation, like how they were raised, again, their
mhm,
community, their culture, but I think it's fine until someone has that self-awareness to go, "Oh, this makes me really uncomfortable.
exactly.
And now what am I gonna do with that? Because I can't kind of unsee that."
Yep, yes. Yeah, so it's interesting, again, going big picture view to think about maybe how, um I was going to say how boundaries have changed through the decades, but I don't even know if that's the right way to think of it, but are there's a much greater awareness, I think,
Mhm,
now. Like my son, he's going to be 22 in a couple of weeks, and when I think back to, like, when I was 22 compared to what he experiences as a 22-year-old, it's vastly different, and I'd like to say it's in that respect, it's better now.
mhm,
I
mhm.
think there's so much more openness and willingness, right, to kinda confront the discomfort,
Yes.
and the uncomfortable topics much more than when we were teenagers.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Are there any other types of boundaries that you think are important that we haven't talked about?
I don't think so, because, we the one the professional boundaries and the work boundaries is the other one on my list, but I actually think
Mm,
we have discussed it. Um,
yeah.
I don't know if there's anything else you wanna add about that, but no, I feel pretty good about
Okay,
where we're at.
okay. One of the things that I find, and I will sit and talk about boundaries with clients or, friends and whatnot, but I find that it's all well and good to talk about it, but people struggle with the implementation.
Yes.
And even I mean, and before the implementation, it's also like, really, what is an example of a healthy boundary? And it's funny because if I get that question, I'm like, "Oh, that's not a simple canned answer." I mean, because it goes to everything we've talked about so far.
Right, where there's so many, yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting what people don't think about. Like, they don't think that it can be something really simple.
Mhm,
And, I mean, my husband and I joke about this, but it's kind of a thing where, like, if I need to eat, I need to eat.
mhm. Yep,
And
yep.
and he gets mad at me like, you know, "But you don't have any snacks? Like, you need to have snacks." And it's and I sometimes struggle because I will be enjoying, like, if we're out and we're especially if we're traveling, I'll be like, "Oh, I wanna keep doing what we're doing." But I have to say, and I've he'll catch it before me, but I'm trying to get better around, "No, I need to eat." And I notice I'm better with friends, than I
Mhm.
am necessarily with him, but, like, we'll be out with friends or I'll be out with friends, and I'll be like, "Hey, you know what? I really need to have a snack before we go do this."
Yep.
And it's I've never gotten flack for it, um, But I do think that that's people don't think about, how small something can be, and that's one of the things I do say to people, like, if you're new to setting boundaries, start with something really small that no one is gonna bat an eyelash at,
Mm,
and, it's you're gonna get some wins there, and you're gonna build your confidence in that regard.
I love that idea, and then maybe that can lead to some bigger things, right? Like having to say no to something perhaps that you know, is scary to say no to.
Right.
Um
Yeah. And I think one of the things I mean, it's funny when I was making my notes in terms of, like, that question of how do I set a healthy boundary? And it goes back to what we've said before, like, being clear,
Mhm,
um, knowing what you need and what you want and being able to state that. But it was interesting because one of the things that kept coming up and what I was looking for, like, doing my research was don't raise your voice. And
mhm,
it struck me because 'cause I'm like, "Do we really have to mention 'don't raise your voice'?" I'm like, "But it's popping up." And I think what happens is people get really frustrated when their
mhm,
boundaries are pushed or
mhm,
ignored, and then
mhm.
that is what happens. So
Yes.
then when they get to this place of, "Okay, fine, I'm gonna set my boundaries, but I have to be loud because they haven't heard me in the past." And no, don't be loud because then they are not gonna hear you.
You're gonna get defensive
Exactly,
or yell
exactly.
back, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that holds people back too from setting or holding their boundaries is that how that other person may react if they are unhappy. Because if you think about it, much like a lot of the things we've talked about in season 1, as we change, either the
Mhm,
system is going to change with us or it's gonna push back.
mhm.
And when we start setting boundaries, if someone is not accustomed to us doing that, they're gonna push back or they're gonna at least question, be like, "What are you doing? You've never done this before."
Right.
And that is going to feel uncomfortable.
Mhm, mhm.
And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges of setting boundaries and holding those boundaries is allowing yourself to be uncomfortable and sit with that, what I would call that yuckiness and that discomfort.
And if that sounds challenging to you listeners, I'd suggest going back and listening to our episode on leaning into discomfort, right?
Yes.
Because that's exactly what you're talking about here. It's human nature to avoid and turn away from anything that makes us feel uncomfortable, but it might actually be the very thing that we need to, for example, establish that healthy boundary to get our needs met. Um, so yeah, really important point.
Yes, and I think, again, to tie everything together, it is being compassionate and giving yourself grace and love because it's not easy to do these things, and
No.
it's very often a work in progress. I mean, if you think I can think back, like, what I say maybe was okay with 30 years ago, I'm not okay with now, or maybe
Right.
things that, or vice versa, where it's like, "Oh, I never would have done that," but I'm like, "Oh, now I'm great with that." So, it's it all comes back to that, I think, using that word curiosity and challenging yourself and really looking internally and saying like, "Okay, what's working for me and what's not? And am I willing to take that risk to change?"
Exactly. And change is how you grow.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
Okay. Is there anything else that you think we missed or you wanna bring up?
I don't think so. I'm feeling good about what we've covered. How about you?
No, I feel good. It's a big
Okay.
topic,
It is, yes.
and I feel like in some ways we've just really scratched the surface, but,
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
as long as people, like I said before, as long as this gets people thinking, and I hope it's helpful for our listeners.
Yep, and if listeners have if this conversation has sparked more questions about boundaries or if you have a comment, you can certainly contact us and we will respond.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So, before we forget, and maybe I should say me before I forget, um, As always, if you're liking what you're hearing, please share our podcast with other people. Don't ever hesitate to reach out to us. We welcome the feedback and questions and comments. Make sure you tune in next time. We're going to be tackling the idea of emotional resilience, which I'm excited for.
Yes,
I think that'll be good.
absolutely. So take care, listeners. It's good to be back, and we will be back in a couple of weeks.
Yes, thank you again and take good care. If you want to share your thoughts or ideas with us, you can email us at therapyunpluggedpodcast@proton.me. Until next time, be sure to subscribe to Therapy Unplugged on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts.